What happens when Hollywood's most beloved action star walks onto a late-night show expecting the usual banter, only to find himself blindsided by questions that cross every professional line? The tension in Studio 6B at Rockefeller Center was so thick you could cut it with a knife. And what started as a routine promotional appearance quickly spiraled into one of the most uncomfortable moments in late-night television history. Before we get into exactly what went down, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us what you think really happened here, because this story has layers you won't believe. Jimmy Fallon's show is known for its lighthearted games, musical parodies, and softball questions that make celebrities feel right at home. It's essentially a safe space where stars can promote their latest projects without breaking a sweat. But on this particular evening, something was different from the moment Chris Hemsworth walked through those curtains. The audience erupted in their typical enthusiastic applause. Jimmy did his signature desk slap, and Chris settled into the guest chair with that easy smile fans know so well. Everything seemed normal, perfectly scripted, exactly what you'd expect. Jimmy started off predictably enough, asking about Chris's latest action film, throwing in a joke about how many times he'd had to work out shirtless for the role. Chris laughed, gave a modest answer about his training regimen, and the audience ate it up. They moved through the usual beats, discussing stunts, funny moments on set, working with the director. Chris was charming, self-deprecating, everything a talk show guest should be. But then Jimmy shifted gears in a way that immediately changed the atmosphere in the room. "So, I've got to ask you something," Jimmy said, and there was a slight change in his tone that Chris clearly picked up on. "There's been a lot of talk online, a lot of speculation, about some of your recent career choices. People are wondering if you're maybe, I don't know, playing it a bit safe these days." Chris's smile didn't quite reach his eyes anymore. "Safe how?" "Well, you know," Jimmy continued, leaning back in his chair with a casualness that felt forced. "You've done, what, for action movies in the last 2 years? All pretty similar, all big-budget spectacles. Some critics are saying you're in a bit of a rut, that you're not challenging yourself anymore. What do you say to that?" The audience went quiet. This wasn't the Jimmy Fallon playbook. This was the kind of question you'd expect from a more confrontational interviewer, not from the guy who played egg Russian roulette with his guests. Chris shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening just slightly. "I think that's a pretty reductive way to look at it. Jimmy, these films employ thousands of people, they entertain millions, and yeah, I'm good at this genre. I don't really see that as a negative." No, absolutely not," Jimmy said quickly, but he didn't drop it. "But come on, you're a talented actor. Don't you ever want to do something completely different? Something smaller, more intimate? I mean, when's the last time you did a real dramatic role?" "A real dramatic role," Chris repeated slowly, and you could hear the edge creeping into his voice. "As opposed to the fake dramatic roles I've apparently been doing." Jimmy laughed, but it sounded hollow. "You know what I mean? Something that really stretches you as an actor. Something where you're not just, punching aliens or whatever." Chris leaned forward, his easygoing demeanor evaporating. "Jimmy, with all due respect, you're talking about my work like it's some kind of guilty pleasure that doesn't require any actual skill. Do you have any idea what goes into these performances? The physicality, the emotional range, the months of preparation? I'm sure it's very hard," Jimmy said, and whether he meant it to or not, it came across as patronizing. The audience was dead silent now, sensing that something had gone very wrong. "Is it though?" Chris asked, "because it sounds like you're suggesting that what I do is somehow less legitimate than other types of acting, like it's easy, or beneath me, or not worthy of respect." Jimmy tried to recover, his hands coming up in a placating gesture. "That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just, I'm asking the questions that people out there are asking. It's my job too, to push a little bit, to get interesting answers. By insulting my career choices on national television." Chris's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. "That's your idea of interesting." "Chris, come on, man," Jimmy said, and now he was starting to look genuinely uncomfortable. "Don't take it like that. I'm a huge fan, you know that. I'm just trying to have a real conversation here instead of the usual promotional stuff." "A real conversation," Chris said flatly. "Right, so let me ask you something. Jimmy, when's the last time you did something that really challenged you? When's the last time you took a risk with this show? Tried something different, pushed yourself creatively instead of doing the same games and bits you've been recycling for years?" The color drained from Jimmy's face. A few people in the audience gasped. This was escalating fast, and everyone in the studio could feel it. That's different," Jimmy stammered. We're not talking about me here. Why not?" Chris pressed. "You want to talk about playing it safe? You want to talk about being in a rut? Let's talk about a late-night host who's built an entire career on not making anyone uncomfortable, on keeping everything light and safe and at least my action movies take a stance, tell a story, mean something to the people who watch them." Jimmy's signature smile was completely gone now. "I think you're overreacting here. Chris, I asked you one question about your career, and you're turning this into something it doesn't need to be." "One question." Chris let out a short, humorless laugh. You questioned my artistic integrity, suggested my work is meaningless, and now you're telling me I'm overreacting. How would you feel if I came on here and told you that your show is vapid and your interviewing skills are superficial? I'd probably think you were being a bit of a jerk. Honestly, Jimmy shot back, and there was a flash of anger in his eyes now too. The pleasant host mask was cracking. Well, at least we're being honest now, Chris said. That's more real than anything else that's happened on this show in months. I'd bet. Jimmy stood up from behind his desk, something he almost never did during an interview unless it was planned. You know what, Chris? Maybe you're right. Maybe this show is too safe, too light. But at least I'm not standing here acting like I'm doing Shakespeare when I'm really just cashing checks from Marvel and pretending it's high art. The audience was in complete shock. Some people were pulling out their phones, already recording what was quickly becoming viral content. Chris stood up too, and for a moment, the two men just stared at each other across the desk. Is that what you really think? Chris asked quietly. That I'm just cashing checks. That I don't care about the work, about the stories, about giving people something meaningful to connect with. Jimmy seemed to realize he'd gone too far. Chris, I didn't. No, you did. Chris interrupted. You absolutely did. And you know what the worst part is? I came here tonight thinking this would be fun. I've always liked you, Jimmy. I've always thought you were one of the good ones in this business. But this is just cheap. This is you trying to manufacture a moment, trying to create some controversy for views. And you're using my career, my choices, my work as your ammunition. That's not fair, Jimmy protested. I was just asking questions. Loaded questions, Chris corrected. Disrespectful questions designed to put me on the defensive and make yourself look edgy. Well, congratulations, you got your moment. Jimmy's hands were gripping the edge of his desk now, his knuckles white. You know what, Chris? Maybe I did push a little harder than usual. Maybe I did ask some tough questions. But you're a big boy. You're a massive movie star. And I think you can handle a little bit of criticism without falling apart on my show. Chris laughed, but there was no humor in it. Falling apart. Is that what you think this is? Jimmy, I'm not falling apart. I'm calling you out for being unprofessional. There's a difference between asking tough questions and being disrespectful. And you crossed that line about 5 minutes ago. Unprofessional. Jimmy's voice rose slightly. I've been doing this for over a decade. I know how to conduct an interview. Do you? Chris challenged. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you forgot the basic principle of this whole thing. I'm here as your guest. I came here voluntarily to talk about my work, to entertain your audience, to help make your show successful. And you repay that by ambushing me with this pseudo-intellectual critique of my career that you're not even qualified to make. Not qualified. Jimmy's face was flushed now. I've interviewed hundreds of actors. I think I have some perspective on this industry. Interviewing actors doesn't make you a film critic. Jimmy, it doesn't give you insight into the creative process or the decisions that go into building a career. You sit behind that desk and you ask questions, but you don't actually create anything. You don't put yourself out there the way actors do. You don't face the rejection, the scrutiny, the constant pressure to prove yourself over and over again. The Roots, Jimmy's house band, were completely motionless, watching this unfold like everyone else. Questlove's expression was one of pure disbelief. This was unprecedented territory for The Tonight Show. Jimmy came round from behind the desk, closing the distance between himself and Chris. You think I don't face pressure? You think this job is easy? I'm out here every single night, live, performing for millions of people, trying to make them laugh, trying to make them forget about their problems for an hour. Don't talk to me about pressure. And I respect that, Chris said, his voice level. I've never said your job was easy, but I'm not the one who came at you questioning whether your work has value. I'm not the one who implied that you're wasting your talent on something meaningless. You did that to me. I was trying to have a substantive conversation, Jimmy insisted. I was trying to go deeper than the usual fluff. I thought you of all people would appreciate that. Substantive. Chris shook his head slowly. Jimmy, there's nothing substantive about putting someone down to make yourself look smart. You want to have a real conversation about the film industry, about the balance between commercial success and artistic integrity, about the choices actors have to make in this business. I'm all for it, but that's not what you were doing. You were performing, just like you accused me of doing. You were trying to score points with some imaginary audience that thinks talk shows are too soft. Maybe they are too soft, Jimmy countered. Maybe I'm tired of blowing smoke at celebrities who come on here expecting nothing but praise. Maybe I wanted to actually challenge you for once instead of just letting you coast through another interview promoting another forgettable action movie. The words hung in the air like poison. Chris went very still, and when he spoke again, his voice was dangerously quiet. Forgettable. Chris, I didn't mean no. You said it. Forgettable. That's what you think of my work. That's what you really think. Chris took a step back, creating distance. I've spent the last 15 years building a career, working with incredibly talented directors and actors, telling stories that matter to people all over the world, and you just called it forgettable. Jimmy ran a hand through his hair, clearly realizing the hole he'd dug for himself. Look, That came out wrong. I'm not saying your movies are bad. I'm just saying that maybe you're capable of more. Based on what? Chris demanded. Based on your expert analysis, based on your deep understanding of my abilities and aspirations, or based on some pretentious idea you have about what constitutes real art versus entertainment. It's not pretentious to want more from talented people, Jimmy argued. And there it is again, Chris said, this assumption that what I'm doing now isn't meaningful. Tell that to the kids who watch these movies and see themselves as heroes. Tell that to the people who escape their difficult lives for 2 hours and feel inspired, feel hopeful, feel like they can overcome their own obstacles. Tell them that what they're connecting with is meaningless and forgettable. I'm not talking about the audience, Jimmy said. I'm talking about you, about your legacy as an actor. My legacy. Chris's eyebrows shot up. Jimmy, I'm 41 years old. I'm still building my legacy. And part of that legacy is bringing joy to millions of people through these films you're so quick to dismiss. I'm proud of that. I don't need your validation or anyone else's to know that what I do matters. The audience was completely transfixed. This had gone so far beyond a typical celebrity interview that it was almost hard to process. Some people were clearly uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. Others were leaning forward, not wanting to miss a single word. Jimmy spread his hands in a gesture of frustration. I'm not trying to invalidate what you do. I'm really not. I'm just asking if you ever think about doing something different. And I answered that question, Chris said firmly. I told you that I'm good at what I do, that I'm proud of what I do, and that I don't see it as a limitation. But that wasn't good enough for you. You kept pushing, kept implying that there's something wrong with my choices. Why? What are you really trying to accomplish here? I'm trying to have an interesting show, Jimmy said, his voice rising again. I'm trying to give people something worth watching instead of just another boring celebrity interview where everyone smiles and nods and says exactly what's expected. At my expense, Chris pointed out, you're trying to make your show interesting by making me look like someone who's sold out or given up on artistic integrity. That's not journalism, Jimmy. That's just mean. It's not mean to ask tough questions, Jimmy protested. It is when those questions are rooted in disrespect. Chris shot back. You want to know why most celebrity interviews are softball questions? Because most hosts understand that their job is to make their guests feel comfortable enough to be themselves, to open up, to give the audience something genuine. You're doing the opposite. Jimmy crossed his arms. Maybe a little conflict is good. Maybe it's more honest than pretending everything is perfect all the time. Honest. Chris let out a sharp breath. Jimmy, if you wanted honesty, you could have approached this completely differently. You could have asked me how I balance commercial success with personal artistic goals. You could have asked what draws me to action films. You could have had an actual conversation. Instead, you came at me with judgment and condescension. I'm just surprised that you can't handle a little bit of pushback, Jimmy said. You're a tough guy in the movies, but apparently criticism is where you draw the line. Chris's expression hardened. Now you're just being childish. This isn't about whether I can handle criticism. I've been criticized plenty, by people far more qualified than you. This is about respect. This is about you inviting me onto your show and then treating me like I'm some kind of cautionary tale. That's not what I did, Jimmy insisted. It's exactly what you did, Chris countered. And the worst part is, you seem to think you're in the right here. You seem to think that because you're the host, because this is your show, you get to say whatever you want without consequence. I do get to ask whatever questions I want, Jimmy said defensively. That's literally my job, and it's my job to decide whether I want to sit here and answer them. Chris replied coldly, and right now, I'm seriously questioning why I'm still in this chair. The threat hung in the air. The audience collectively held its breath. Jimmy's eyes widened, recognizing that he was on the verge of having a guest walk out on him. Chris, come on, Jimmy said, his tone shifting. Let's just take a breath here. We're both getting heated. Let's reset. Chris repeated incredulously. Jimmy, you can't unsay what you said. You called my work forgettable. You implied I'm not living up to my potential. How exactly do we reset from that? I apologize, Jimmy said quickly. Okay, I'm sorry. I pushed too hard. I said things I shouldn't have said. Can we move past this? Chris studied him for a long moment. Are you apologizing because you actually think you were wrong, or because you're afraid of how this looks? Jimmy's face tightened. Does it matter? I'm apologizing. That should be enough. It matters to me, Chris said quietly, because if you're just doing damage control, then we're not actually resolving anything. What do you want from me? Jimmy asked, frustration clear in his voice. You want me to grovel? I want you to understand why what you did was wrong, Chris said. You have millions of viewers, you have influence, and instead of using that responsibly, you went for the cheap shot. You tried to make yourself look edgy by tearing down what I do. I asked legitimate questions about your career, Jimmy argued, but he sounded less certain now. No, Chris corrected him. You made judgments disguised as questions. If you'd asked me why I'm drawn to action films, what I find fulfilling about them, those would be legitimate questions. But you came at me with the premise that what I'm doing is somehow lesser. That's not curiosity, Jimmy. That's criticism wrapped in a question mark. The audience was completely silent, several people recording on their phones. Knowing they were witnessing something unforgettable, Jimmy walked back behind his desk. Maybe I was harder on you than I needed to be, but you're acting like I committed some unforgivable sin here. You violated the trust of a guest who came on your show in good faith, Chris said. And now you're trying to justify it instead of taking responsibility. I said I was sorry, Jimmy protested. You said the words, Chris agreed, but you don't mean them. You're still defending yourself, still trying to make this my fault. A real apology would include some self-reflection. Jimmy drummed his fingers on the desk. You know what I think? I think you came on here looking for a fight. I think you were so ready to be offended that you turned a simple question into this whole big thing. Chris's eyes narrowed. So, now we're back to this being my problem. Maybe if you weren't so insecure about your career choices, you wouldn't have reacted this way, Jimmy said. The audience gasped. Chris stood up slowly, staring at Jimmy with an unreadable expression. Insecure, Chris repeated softly. That's your assessment. I'm just saying that a confident person wouldn't get this upset about a few questions, Jimmy said, realizing his mistake but too deep to back down. A confident person also wouldn't hide behind their desk and insult their guest when they can't win an argument on merit, Chris said, but here we are. I'm not hiding, Jimmy said, not moving from behind the desk. Then come out here and have this conversation like an adult, Chris challenged. If you really think I'm the problem here, say it to my face. Jimmy hesitated, and that hesitation spoke volumes. The power dynamic had completely shifted. This is ridiculous, Jimmy said. I'm not going to engage in some macho standoff with you. You want to take shots at me, but you don't want any consequences, Chris said. You want to be the edgy interviewer who asks tough questions, but you also want to be the lovable guy that everyone likes. You can't be both. Jimmy, what line did I cross? Jimmy demanded. I asked about your career. That's it. You questioned my integrity, Chris said, his voice rising. You implied that I'm a sellout, that I've given up on being a real actor. And you did it in front of millions of people, knowing that I couldn't just walk away without looking like the bad guy. Jimmy's face was red now. I never said you were a sellout. You didn't have to say it explicitly. Chris shot back. It was in every question you asked, every skeptical look. You made your opinion clear without having the guts to just state it outright. You want to talk about guts? Jimmy laughed bitterly. You're the one who plays superheroes for a living. Don't lecture me about guts. Chris took a step closer to the desk. At least I'm honest about what I do. At least I own it. But you want everyone to think you're this nice guy, this harmless entertainer. Tonight you showed everyone who you really are. You're insecure about your own relevance, so you tried to tear me down to build yourself up. Jimmy stood up abruptly. Get out. The audience gasped. Chris didn't move. What did you say? Chris asked, his voice dangerously calm. I said get out. Jimmy repeated louder. This interview is over. I don't have to sit here and take this kind of disrespect on my own show. Chris laughed in disbelief. Disrespect? You started this, you came at me, you insulted my work, and now you're throwing me out because I defended myself. You're twisting everything, Jimmy said, his voice shaking. You're making me out to be the villain. A real conversation requires mutual respect, Chris said, something you clearly don't have for me. So yeah, maybe it is time for me to go. But don't act like you're taking some noble stand. You're kicking me out because you lost control of your own show. I didn't lose control of anything, Jimmy insisted weakly. Look around, Jimmy, Chris said. Everyone in this room knows exactly what happened here tonight. Then leave, Jimmy said, arms crossed. If this is so beneath you, just go. Chris nodded slowly, reaching up to unclip the microphone from his shirt. You know what the saddest part is? I actually used to respect you. I thought you were different. But tonight you showed me that it's all an act. The nice guy routine is just that, a routine. He placed the microphone on the arm of the guest chair and turned toward the exit. The audience sat in stunned silence. Chris, Jimmy called out. Chris stopped, but didn't turn around. What? This isn't how I wanted this to go, Jimmy said quietly. Chris looked back over his shoulder. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you started throwing punches. Because once you start something like this, you don't get to control how it ends. He walked off the stage, his footsteps echoing in the silent studio. The cameras caught him disappearing through the curtain, leaving Jimmy standing alone behind his desk. Jimmy cleared his throat. Well, that was certainly something. We're going to take a quick break, but the damage was done. What was supposed to be a simple promotional appearance had turned into one of the most uncomfortable moments in late-night television history. So what do you think really happened here? Was Chris out of line for defending himself so aggressively? Or was Jimmy the one who crossed the line with his questioning? Drop a comment below with your thoughts, and make sure you hit that subscribe button.